Are America's future judges being coached to ignore reality? In a blistering Senate Judiciary hearing on March 25, 2026, Senator Sheldon Whitehouse didn't just question the nominees. He tore into them for what he called preposterous, canned answers. From the refusal to admit Joe Biden won in 2020 to a shocking revelation about the U.S. Marshal Service refusing to investigate threats against judges, Whitehouse exposes a mega Department of Justice that he claims is leaving the judiciary exposed. We're breaking down the full exchange and the explosive executive handler allegations that have rocked the 2026 confirmation cycle.
Finish Senator Blumenthal's point. I hope you realize how ridiculous the four of you look. Spouting these preposterous, canned answers in a forum in which A, you're supposed to tell the truth, and B, you're supposed to demonstrate the judicial capacity to make independent, factual decisions in hard cases. If you can't even sit here and say that Joe Biden won that election or that the Capitol was attacked, what's left? What's left if a hard case comes your way as a judge, and let's say the Trump administration is bearing down on that? Why would we ever believe that you would give the litigants a fair hearing and a fair decision if the executive branch was leaning in on you when we can't get a reasonable answer out of any of you with the executive branch leaning in on you to give these ridiculous answers today? I'm really sorry to have to go through this and that you have to go through this. But it would be nice if you could tell your executive branch handlers, for instance, Ms. Clark, I'm supported by Lindsey Graham. He's a friend of President Trump. He's the second senior person on the Republican side in the Judiciary Committee. He's likely to be the next Judiciary Committee chair. I think I'll be okay. I don't need to make myself ridiculous at your direction. It'd be great if you could have said that. It would be great if your answers were simple and honest here today. It's really disappointing. Let me ask a different question, a legal question. A judge, you want to be judges. A judge gets a threat to the judge's life or to the judge's family. Can you imagine a scenario in which liability may attach to individuals beyond the utterer of that threat? Ms. Clark?
Senator, as a prosecutor, there are instances where there's some responsibility that is assigned to someone who is not the utterer of a threat to an individual. And so to answer your question, yes, I can imagine.
Do you agree?
Yes, Senator, and if confirmed to the bench, I would follow all Supreme Court precedent and Ninth Circuit precedent.
Mr. Rick, you agree?
Yes, Senator, I would agree with that.
I don't know that I care what you think, Ms. Westercamp, because you're going to international trade and you're probably not going to see much of this, but do you agree?
Yes, Senator.
Yeah, and those doctrines that would provide the legal basis for investigation in those scenarios would include doctrines like, name one, Ms. Clark.
Senator, doctrines that are, if someone is essentially carrying out
solicitation, would that be one? Solicitation
yes.
of a threat?
Yes.
Or a conspiracy out of which the threat emerged, would that be another one?
Yes.
Yes. How about, and it's the product of an enterprise under the racketeering statutes. Would that also be another way that liability could extend beyond the utterer?
That is correct, Senator.
Can you think of any others, Ms. Lane, where liability extends beyond the utterer of the threat? What are some of the legal theories that would support that kind of investigation and prosecution?
Senator, the doctrines you mentioned, I would agree with, and I would just look always to the federal law and federal statutes guiding that.
Mr. Rickey?
Senator, I would agree with that. I think you covered the major ones, conspiracy, RICO. There may be other avenues of potential legal liability, but I think you covered the three big ones in that scenario.
Ms. Westercamp, you agree?
Senator, I'm not aware if there are any more with my practice before the Court of International Trade and Court of Federal Claims. It doesn't touch on criminal law.
So here's why I asked you these questions. I asked you these questions because right now federal judges are under the worst shadow of physical threat in my lifetime and perhaps in the history of this country. And in responding to those threats, we have the United States Marshals Service, which reports to the Department of Justice. And I have now over a dozen times asked the Marshals Service, will you investigate behind the utterer of a threat if the evidence justifies it? That's a super easy question. The answer is, yeah, of course we will. They won't answer that. They won't answer that. And I point this out because judges across the country need to pay attention to the fact that the Marshals Service won't confirm that it will investigate behind the utterer of a threat if the evidence supports that. And why would that be the case? That would be the case because when you get behind the utterer of a lot of these threats, you run into right-wing conspiracies. And this MAGA Department of Justice would rather not go there. And so they leave judges exposed with investigations in which they aren't doing investigative 101 work that you've all identified as plausible legal theories. And we need to fix that. We need to fix that.
The Senate Judiciary Committee hearing on March 25, 2026, erupted into one of the most intense confrontations in recent memory as Senator Sheldon Whitehouse took the floor to finish a line of questioning started by Senator Blumenthal. Whitehouse didn't just challenge the nominees on their legal philosophy, he dismantled the very idea of their independence in real time. Addressing a panel of 4 judicial nominees, including Kara Westercamp and Ms. Clark, Whitehouse labeled their refusal to admit that Joe Biden won the 2020 election as a preposterous and ridiculous performance. His core argument strikes at the heart of the separation of powers. If a potential federal judge cannot acknowledge basic historical facts under the lien of the current executive branch, there is zero reason to believe they would provide a fair hearing to litigants if the Trump administration bears down on them in a future hard case. The dialogue then shifted from political accountability to a dark, systemic reality facing the American judiciary in 2026, the physical safety of the bench. Whitehouse led the nominees through a technical legal exercise, forcing them to identify doctrines like RICO, conspiracy, and solicitation that allow investigators to look beyond the person who utters a threat to the enterprise that organized it. This wasn't a law school quiz. It was a trap designed to expose a failure in the current Department of Justice. Once the nominees agreed that these legal theories are investigative 101, Whitehouse dropped a bombshell. He revealed that despite over a dozen requests, the U.S. Marshals Service, which reports to the DOJ, has consistently refused to confirm that they will investigate the entities behind a threat if the evidence justifies it. As we look at the implications of this hearing in late March 2026, Whitehouse's narrative points to a calculated cover-up intended to protect political allies. He alleges that because the evidence behind many of these threats leads directly to right-wing conspiracies and the MAGA movement, the current DOJ is intentionally leaving federal judges exposed to violence. By only prosecuting the individual utterer and refusing to follow the trail to the organizational source, Whitehouse claims the government is prioritizing political protection over judicial safety. He warned that judges across the country must pay attention to this silence, as it suggests the Marshal Service is being restrained by what he calls a mega Department of Justice that simply would rather not go there. Ultimately, this hearing marks a definitive turning point in the 2026 judicial confirmation process. It highlights a massive breakdown in trust where nominees appear more loyal to their executive handlers than to the constitutional requirement of impartiality. Whitehouse's final call to action, that we need to fix the Marshal Service's refusal to protect the bench, serves as a rallying cry for the 2026 Oversight Committee. In an era where political loyalty is increasingly demanded of the judiciary, this video stands as primary evidence of the fight to keep the third branch of government from being swallowed by the unlimited hubris of the executive.